We need to talk about Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on the Nintendo Switch 2 and what is happening with this game, especially because this is a complete, I would say, shift in turn for Square Enix in a very pivotal time, not only for the company, but also for Nintendo as well with the Nintendo Switch 2. So let's go ahead and first get into the big thing with this game, and that is, of course, the release date. We finally have a confirmed release date for this game and some other things as well. So Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade will officially launch for the Nintendo Switch 2 in addition to the Xbox Series on January 22nd, 2026. So this is interesting because some people thought that it would be this year, but they did officially say winter. So winter does stretch from this year to next year. So I always felt that it was a possibility that it could come next year as well. And if you look at the lineup that Nintendo has for the end of the year, where they're actually packing in multiple games in multiple months, it makes sense that Square Enix and Nintendo probably looked at everything and said, you know what, let's give this its own month. Let's give it its own clean release. And I think that that's probably the best idea because I know that Square Enix and Nintendo both feel that this game can be a big driver for them going forward and introducing the Nintendo audience more to these characters and this style of game that's not an old classic one or something like that, but it's actually like more of the newer modern Final Fantasy. So this is definitely going to be interesting to see exactly how well it does or not on the Nintendo Switch 2. Now, you guys know about Final Fantasy VII Remake in terms of what it is. The game is about 5 years old now, but the Intergrade version is interesting because it gives you both the regular base game and the DLC content that came with it. And the most craziest thing that I found from this was that it's going to be $40, and that is a very good price for this game. Now, it is going to come on a key card, but this is probably the most interesting key card that's ever been out there. And I know that people don't love key cards, and I don't either, but the game is 90 gigabytes. It's a little bit under 90, so there's no way that it would have fit on a standard cartridge. And I know some people are going to bring up the cyberpunk factor, and I get that, guys. Cyberpunk, they were able to kind of trim that down and get it on a cart. But I do think that if you're looking at Final Fantasy and what it does from the quality of the audio to the amount of languages to all of the stuff in there, the dialogue and everything, I mean, it is a beefy game overall. So I think that not all games are created equal when it comes to exactly trying to compress and get certain things. And I don't think that a game like FF7 Remake Intergrade needs to be compromised much, as it's a base PS4 game at the start overall, then put on PlayStation 5. And this version of the game seems to be somewhere in between. Like, they took the PS5 version of the Intergrade and then they said, okay, let's scale it, let's adapt it to the Nintendo Switch on Unreal Engine 4. Coming in at 30 FPS overall, but it seems like it's going to be locked or near locked. And quality texture-wise, based off of the debut trailer and based off what we've seen so far, it looks really sharp and good and better than the PlayStation 4 version of the game or PS4 Pro version of the game. So that's definitely a good thing quality-wise. Now, let's talk about this key card, though, because once again, this is one of the most interesting physical key card releases we've got, and I think it incentivizes people to pick this one up over previous key cards, which once again, I don't like key cards overall, but let's take a look at what you get here. So apparently you get the Magic the Gathering Play booster inside. Just a bit ago, they announced some Magic the Gathering cards, Final Fantasy crossover, and apparently you get some of those in there with this, and you also get a reversible cover. So if you want to have one side cover or the other, you can do that, which once again, physical collectors do like stuff like that. You also get the FF7 episode intermission, the Intergrade. That is, of course, when you download the game, but then there's also other things like a weapon, there's some summon materia, there's some accessories, and there's some armor. All of that is digital in-game content. And if you pre-order the digital edition, you can get the original Final Fantasy VII on the Switch 2 eShop or the Switch eShop. You can get that. But for this is the physical edition of the game, and this is a pretty nice physical edition. So if you're going to do a key card, I think that including an actual reversible cover, including maybe a booklet, including some extra little things here and there, well, I think will soften the blow just a bit for those who do decide to go the key card route overall. Now, I do think that when you're looking at it from Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, one of the biggest games when it comes to Square Enix portfolio, so that's going to have a big impact overall. And the biggest thing that we heard from Square Enix on this front is that yes, they are going to be doing the whole trilogy when it comes to Final Fantasy. Yes, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, we know that's coming over to Switch 2, but also Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3. All of those are coming over to Nintendo Switch 2 and Xbox and PC. Now, Rebirth is already out on PlayStation. It came out back in 2024 early, so that's probably going to be next year for the Nintendo Switch 2. But then Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 3, we don't know when that's going to be. That might be a 2027 game or so about 3 years after Rebirth. So I think that that could be day and date on the Nintendo Switch 2, which would be huge and a complete shift in terms of things. So that could be day and date Xbox, PC, Nintendo Switch 2, and PlayStation 5, or maybe even PlayStation 6 at that point when it comes down to it. But before we get into the next topic with this game, please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, and click that notification bell to get my vids as soon as they drop. All right, let's go ahead and jump into the next thing here. And Square Enix is banking on a multi-platform and being a huge presence on the Nintendo Switch 2, especially in Japan. And I know that here in the West or on Twitter, you will hear a lot of different things in terms of what some people are saying or even lying when it comes to the Nintendo Switch 2 or the sales numbers or the adoption rate or different things, because people are always clickbaiting and always looking for the easiest way out when it comes down to stuff. But overall, if you look at what's happening in Japan, it's clear that the Nintendo Switch 2 is going to be the dominating platform for the generation. They've already sold multiple millions and have to constantly do lotteries overall just for people to be able to buy one. Unlike many parts here in the West, you can't just walk into a store and buy a Nintendo Switch 2. Nintendo's trying to allocate their stock to areas to where, yes, the bigger areas, bigger population, they have more stock so people can freely walk in and buy one casually, as the system is a bit more expensive than what we saw with the Nintendo Switch 1, and they're still adopting from people going from Switch 1 to Switch 2. It is going to be a transition. Whereas with the Nintendo Switch 2 in Japan, obviously, tinier country, less of a population, but still a lot of pent-up passion, a lot of pent-up demand for the Nintendo Switch 2. So Square Enix absolutely saw that towards the end of the Nintendo Switch 1 era. So Square Enix absolutely saw that with the middle of the Switch 1 era, and they saw that they're probably losing millions of dollars not setting up their systems, not setting up things to actually support the Nintendo Switch 1 with big and major games. Everything seemed to be a old port. Everything seemed to be a smaller title overall, which was great. Octopath Traveler 2 had some Dragon Quest stuff on there. They were able to get some big games and everything. Near Automata as a late port, but overall, they didn't invest into the platform, and they completely 180'd on that from the very beginning. They've been talking about Switch 2. They've been saying, hey, look, get this on your Switch 2. They've been pointing over their big games when it comes down to it, and even announced their biggest game when it comes to Final Fantasy that is coming to the platform. So the multi-platform when it comes to Square Enix and the presence that they're going to have with the Nintendo Switch 2, that is going to be key for them going forward. So they're banking on the Nintendo Switch 2 and of course the domination that we see in Japan with these sales numbers. And I do think that the Nintendo Switch 2 for them will affect how they do make their games, because you're going to have to make sure that your game can run on this tablet style device that's very low wattage overall, that does not have the power of a PlayStation 5 Pro or a upcoming PlayStation 6 or a next generation Xbox or a PC. But I think that it's going to be, I would say, a benefit to them. And here's the reason why I say that. A lot of people are not complaining about Final Fantasy's graphics in terms of what they can do from a spectacle standpoint. The performance is one of the things that people had a problem with when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Rebirth and how it looks. If you include the Nintendo Switch 2 from the base level, you're going to have to go for a base look. We already know that games are massive in file size. You can create whatever you want to create as long as you have the time and money and the developers to do that. So if you take that base in terms of what Final Fantasy fans are looking for, and you create that on the Nintendo Switch 2, which is one of the lower common denominators with that, and then you scale up from there, you're going to get a game that not only looks incredible, because obviously look at Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade, so you're going to get something that looks great, but then you're also going to get the performance that's not going to have the issues, and you're not going to have to worry about that overall. You might be able to get games running at 100 frames per second plus when it comes down to it, and it's also going to look good. So I think it's going to change exactly how they develop for things, and I think fans are probably, this is once again me just speculating on it, but I think fans are probably going to be more happy with that than them sitting there and trying to blow up the PlayStation 5 when it comes to the processing and running the game and the graphics and everything, than people complaining that it looks kind of fuzzy, or that the quality mode isn't very good, or that the performance is dipping here and there. I think it's time to kind of just scale things. Just think about it for a second. Think about what you actually need to do in the game when it comes to the content, when it comes to what it does, and then go up from there. And I think it's going to create a better environment for the developers in addition to the game itself. Now, let's talk about what's happening with the thought process of Square Enix. I kind of alluded to it a little bit here, and I think that there is a huge shift in Square Enix's thought process, because before, you would have never thought that they would announce big major Final Fantasy games on a Nintendo platform when it comes to just them talking about things. That has not been their strategy for decades now. The last time that they actually thought about that was the Super Nintendo era. That's how long ago it's been when it comes to a new Final Fantasy game announcement before it's been released on a Nintendo platform. For major Final Fantasy, it was literally Final Fantasy VI on the Super Nintendo. That was the last time. Outside of that, it's all been PlayStation. It's all been potentially getting their games on Xbox as well with the Xbox 360. It's all been kind of PC stuff, and everything that's been relegated to Nintendo has been side games, or like Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles or other types of Final Fantasy games. It's never been the mainline huge Final Fantasy, and that right there is a massive shift. We're talking about decades of never announcing a major Final Fantasy on a Nintendo platform ahead of time. It's been decades, once again, Super Nintendo since then. So that is a huge change in philosophy and what they think. And once again, they didn't do this just out of nowhere. They didn't do this because they just felt like it. They did it because the market and the terms and what's happening has changed. That has changed, so they have to adapt to that. And absolutely, it's the Japanese sales, guys. It's definitely looking at that, and it's looking at the more of lack thereof sales when it comes to the shift of the mindset of what PlayStation owners are buying and what we see on the sales charts. Before, in the past, with the PS1 and the PS2, you used to be able to sell 10 million copies or 8, 7, 9 million copies of a Final Fantasy game, no problem, on singular just that hardware. But that's not happening anymore. That is definitely not the case on the PlayStation 5. They're not selling 10 million copies of mainline Final Fantasy just on PlayStation. The shift in the base of people that are buying has changed from 10, 20 years ago with PlayStation. So that shift has changed in terms of how Square Enix is going to announce and do things, and that's why we're seeing the Nintendo Switch 2 being fastly incorporated from the very beginning. So definitely a huge change in the philosophy, and I think that that is what they needed to do in order to get Final Fantasy to more people. Now I'm going to get into my final thoughts and analysis when it comes to Square Enix, and I think that they're doing a good job when it comes to doubling down on what works. I mean, you have a limited amount of time and resources to get games done in a timely fashion. Games take years to make overall, and Square Enix seem to spread themselves thin, doing all sorts of different types of games and funding all sorts of different type of stuff. And what you can see for the last year or two is that they've been doubling down on what works, and the new IPs and the weird stuff that they were kind of doing back in like 2021, 2022, that's kind of went away. They're doubling down on Dragon Quest. They're doubling down on Final Fantasy. They're doubling down on HD 2D or Team Asano, Bravely Default, this type of stuff. That's what they're doing, and it seems like that's what people are going to buy overall. So yes, new IPs are great. Yes, you want to see new things, but I think the biggest problem now is that the development times and the resources are so stretched because the systems are so much more powerful, because it takes so much more time. Square Enix no longer has the bandwidth overall to be creating all these other things, then also getting Kingdom Hearts, Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and all their mainstays out at a good time, in addition to bringing back classics like Dragon Quest VII for example, that got a remake, something like that might not exist if they were stretching out their resources to multiple different places, making a bunch of new IPs and different things and funding that. Because like I said, there's only a certain amount of resources and time and developers to do what you're going to do within one publisher overall, which is once again why they had a huge reconstruction, changed their president, and did things because they needed to focus down. Now, I think that once they kind of lock down on what they're doing here, maybe you will see something pretty cool when it comes to like a major new IP or something like that, but it's not going to be a lot of stuff like they did before where they're putting out like 7 or 8 games within the span of like a year, and it's all sorts of stuff. I don't think that's going to happen. They're doubling down. Final Fantasy Tactics coming out this year. We already had Bravely Default remastered, which did well. They've been heavily marketing, of course, Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade down at this point, so I think that this is the right call for Square Enix going forward, and I think that it's going to bear a much more popular Final Fantasy when it comes down to it, and I think that more people are just going to get into the franchises that they do have, so lock those down because people have been leaving those. They haven't been selling as well as Square Enix would have liked, and I think that this is a way to get people to kind of come back, and I feel that it will work with this. So we'll see what happens here when it comes to Square Enix. We'll see how things go, but I think that things are going to work out just fine. So what do you guys think overall when it comes to Final Fantasy VII Remake Intergrade on the Nintendo Switch 2 and what's happening with the game? Let me know in the comment section below. All right, guys, that wraps it up for this video here. Thank you so much for watching. I do appreciate it. Please make sure you hit that like button, subscribe if you're someone new, click that notification bell, and check out my other Nintendo Switch 2 RPG content and more right here on screen. Thanks for watching, and we'll catch you guys for the next one. Peace.